My name is Nevan Carling. I'm a third year in the Archaeology and Heritage Management BA. Outside of school, I work as a preservation carpenter and traditional timber framer in New England in the northeast of the United States. So I specialize in doing reconstructions and restorations of historic homes using the historic techniques, but with an orientation toward the production of new timbers that are going into old houses. Sort of a way not only to match the originality of the house, but also keep the craft tradition alive. We generally start with a round log, and we hew it, which is the kind of process of turning something cylindrical to square. And most of the tools we use in that process are axes. When you're hewing and you're standing on the log, you generally have a long-handled axe so that you can notch out between things. But when you get down to the actual part squaring the piece, we use a couple different axes. Large axes to knock off the sort of billets, or the call them nogs, between each knot, and then to finish it we use a hewing axe or a broad axe. And from there, a lot of the time it's still hand augers to do the mortises, and chisels to square them off, and same thing with the tenons. We use hand saws to cut the shoulders of the tenons, and chisels or sometimes axes to knock off the excess and smooth them down. And a lot of the information that we get is not only from the historic record, looking at pictures and looking at the tools and looking at a lot of the time the timbers and seeing what the tool marks have left in order, and sort of reverse engineering from those tool marks how that they were made, so that we can learn the process of how to do this kind of a specific task. But also, wood is a very vocal medium and tells you when you're doing something right and when you're doing something wrong. And so often you are learning by trial by error. And there's always kind of this aha moment. Oh, it clicks, and then suddenly you're off to the races, and then you see it in all the buildings around you. Oh, that's exactly how they did it. So. I started sort of serendipitously with my first job being tool restoration when I was 14 or 15, and that gradually grew into me from grinding the tools to starting to learn how to use the tools in order to not anger my neighbors when I was blacksmithing in my backyard. And starting to work with wood, I quickly began to realize that I was a much better woodworker than I was a blacksmith, and then I quit the blacksmithing. But that has led from kind of one thing to another, from sort of going from trying to just learn how to do this, to being asked to do demonstrations, to being taking courses, and then getting hired to work as a helping in the deconstruction and restoration of houses throughout high school has led me to meet a lot of different people, and have been presented with a bunch of different opportunities to work as a traditional craftsperson. My sort of ongoing project is the restoration of a 1767 workshop that was going to be demolished by the state of Connecticut. It is rumored to be the place where Connecticut banknotes were engraved during the American War of Independence, and it was built by a 22-year-old, so I think being a little bit younger than him, I'm kind of doing the house a little bit of justice. And then other than that, my most recent project was working with Haynes House Studio in Washington, D.C., reconstructing a replica of Truss Number 6 from Notre Dame de Paris, a gesture of solidarity with the restoration that is actually happening in France. So around 50 traditional craftsmen all got together, and in 10 days we went from round log to a vertical truss using mostly only axes to cut all the timbers. Or just before the pandemic, I ended up purchasing a late 18th century loom that I planned to restore as sort of a proving ground for restoration techniques and a little bit of a challenge to myself. And through that, I ended up being able to work for the Marshfield School of Weaving in Marshfield, Vermont. And my sort of role is maybe threefold, where I work for them as a researcher, driving around New England, surveying the timber frame looms that we can find in order to put into a database, which is what my dissertation will be on. But I also help in the restoration and maintenance of the looms, and sometimes I even weave when to prove if the loom that I restored actually functioned. So it's one thing to build a loom-shaped object, and another thing to build a loom. We had to put it through its paces, and I wove 9 yards of denim that got turned into a pair of jeans. I guess that leads into the sort of understanding of what the archaeology degree here has really offered me, which is a deeper understanding of, like, not only the how things are done, but why they were done that way, and the questions that pertain to the past and peoples from the past, and how they may have perceived the world. So it becomes especially pertinent in the buildings trades when you get into a house, and every single house is its own individual character and its own story, and you encounter things that don't make sense to you in the moment, but as you begin to work with it more, you begin to realize why it may have been done that way, and that insight, I think, is extremely important in conjunction with understanding archaeologically about the historic record or the material record that exists in the entire world around us. If anyone wants to get into a historic craft or historic restoration, I guess my piece of advice would be that it isn't as daunting as it may seem, and that just the act of trying to do it is itself a great tool for learning, but it shows to everyone involved that, you know, even if you haven't attained the skills yet, that you're just interested in it, and everyone will welcome you with open arms.